for Research, Terry Magnuson. It was a very difficult day for Provost Clemens and I, as we shared the news that Terry has resigned from his position as Vice Chancellor for Research. As many of you have read, the Federal Office of Research Integrity posted a finding of research misconduct involving a grant application submitted by Terry in his role as a faculty researcher, and he has accepted responsibility for his mistake. We have high professional expectations for the integrity of all research activities carried out here at Carolina. The university follows a federally mandated policy regarding the review of any alleged research misconduct. And we hold everyone involved in research activity at the university to that standard. And as a result, in his role as Vice Chancellor, for which research integrity is overseen by that Office of Sponsored Research and under the direction of the Vice Chancellor, we decided it was best that he step down. Terry is a valued colleague to many people on our campus and has been instrumental in helping us grow our billion-dollar research enterprise. And so the past few days have been difficult, and I'm grateful for Terry's service. And I too want to thank Dr. Penny Gordon Larson for agreeing to serve as interim Vice Chancellor beginning on Monday. I know that Penny's going to do an outstanding job in this role, and I will appreciate your support, the faculty's support, in helping her to transition into this important role. Moving on, I was talking with my wife, Amy, this morning over breakfast and remembering how on March 11th, just 2 years ago, that I brought together our senior leadership team here in the South Building to discuss moving to the remote environment. And I just thought it would be, given that it is the 2-year anniversary of that day, and again, to just think about how far we've come and the way in which we've reimagined the way in which we deliver instruction at Carolina, conduct our research, provide service across the state of North Carolina, how we stayed true to our mission. I just thought I just want to again thank you. I know there were many that gathered in the conference room here in the South Building that day to, as we talked about going remote. And I remember Lloyd Kramer, who was chair of the faculty at the time, Vince Savanitis, secretary of the faculty, and a few others looking across the table at me as if I had 6 eyes, saying, how in the world are we going to shift to an entirely remote environment? We later learned that only about 15% of our faculty at Carolina had ever taught an online course, a remote course. And so, again, leading global public research universities like ours teach society how to adapt. We had to adapt, and we did that. We've overcome a lot, and I couldn't be more proud. And I think that we, again, will continue to reimagine our university, residential living environment, teaching environment, as a result of what we've learned over these past 2 years here on the 2-year anniversary of that significant pivot that we had to take. And, we didn't think it was possible then. And I'm still in awe of the work done by our faculty, staff, and students to transition. Mimi's mentioned the invasion of Ukraine, and I wrote my weekly campus message today, which I think is in the inbox. It's probably arriving soon in your inboxes, but I focused on the invasion of Ukraine. And something I'm really proud of is the way in which we brought our faculty expertise, during this critical time to this conversation. And I think it demonstrates what it means to be a global university. Faculty like Graham Robertson, Malada Vukudova, and Navin Bapat, among many others that I highlighted some of their work in this campus message. It's incredible the ways in which we continue to contribute, regardless of the issue, the crisis, or the grand challenge that we're faced with. Our faculty, our world-class faculty, as I often talk about, steps up to lead. And so I hope you'll have a chance to read that. And again, I want to thank all of you that are working on these important issues, and their work in highlighting the challenges and issues at play in this invasion is inspiring. This morning with the Hussman School faculty, and by now I hope you've seen the announcement that was sent out subsequent to that meeting. But we were pleased to announce that Dr. Raul Rice, who's currently the Dean and Professor of the School of Communication at Emerson College in Boston, has been appointed as the next Dean of the Hussman School of Journalism and Media. We're very excited to welcome Raul to our campus. He emerged through a national search that yielded several very qualified candidates who were visited our campus over the past 2 or 3 months. And so we are very excited to welcome Raul Rice, who will begin July the 1st. And I want to take the opportunity to thank members of the search committee, chaired by Dean Gary Marcianini, for their efforts to bring Dr. Rice to Carolina. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Heidi Hennick-Kaminsky for serving as the interim dean since January, and Heidi will continue in that role over the next several months leading up to Raul's start date on July the 1st. I hope, as I wrap up my comments and pass it off to Provost Clemens, that you'll take some time over the weekend to cheer on the men's basketball team this weekend. Hopefully they can win this evening and take on our rivals down the street for a second time in a week after an exciting win over in Cameron last Saturday. And also, I hope you have a chance to watch our women's basketball team who are entering the NCAA tournament this weekend as well. And so with that, I will turn it over to Chris for comments, and then happy to take questions.
Do you want to take questions together after
I think we'll take questions together because some of what Chris is sharing has to do with searches and things like that. So I think we'll take them together.
Provost Clemens.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mimi. I'm going to start with something Mimi mentioned. Academic and artistic freedom, as you know, are at the core of our institutional values. So I was distressed when I learned last week that photographer Cornell Watson felt that his work was being censored by UNC. This is not acceptable to me as Chief Academic Officer. So I set up a call with Mr. Watson last Friday, March 3rd. Mimi and the executive committee asked me to relate my conversation with Mr. Watson to this council. In that call, I congratulated Mr. Watson for producing what I described as an important, moving, and challenging work. If you have not seen his photographs, some of which were published in the Washington Post, he takes on issues of place, memory, and reckoning. I told him his work challenges us to confront elements of our past that are difficult to grapple with, and that I wanted our students to be able to see them, even the ones that disturb us and make us uneasy. I also apologized to him that UNC had not given him a contract that clearly established who had final artistic control over the exhibition of his prints in the Stone Center. This was our fault. We needed to own it, and I committed to him to do better in the future. He accepted my apology. He went on to talk about the community of people who had contributed to his work and the distress that he felt over letting them down. At the time I talked to him, he was tired from the week, from the work of advocating for that community and for advocating for himself. And he wanted to give up on the Stone Center exhibition. And he asked for my help to secure the prints of his copyrighted work. I agreed to help. So after the call, I called the Stone Center and I drove down in my car to pick up the prints. I will admit that I had not realized they were 5 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. Nonetheless, I got them in the back of my car in 2 loads and brought them to my office in South Building. I will say here that I am grateful to our staff, Javier Jaimes Ayala at the Stone Center, Mark Wampole, Will Black, and Alexis Klein, and any other staff who helped me unload and load these prints in a mild wind, which made them into sails. And I was pretty terrified we were going to wind up breaking one of these. And probably should have called facilities, but I wanted to make good on having them in my possession. So on Wednesday of this week, Mr. Watson came to South Building to pick up the prints, and I was able to meet with him to appreciate his work to ask a few questions. Actually, it was about the color photo, and I can share more if you're interested. And to tell him how much I hope that his work would be displayed where our students could see it in the future. I want to reiterate to this council what I reiterated to him, which is unwavering dedication to the principle of artistic and academic freedom. These are in the bedrock of our values, and they must be at the core of our work to grapple with difficult and disturbing parts of our own institutional history. Let me move on now to update you a bit on the work we've been doing on our Provost Office transition team. I raised some of this work last time. As a reminder, Amy Locklear-Hertel and I have charged the transition team with soliciting input from a broad range of voices on campus. We want to be advocates in chief for our academic community, and we'll do that best if we hear from you. So I'm asking you again to reach out to either of us, or if you're more comfortable to reaching out to the team, you can find the members listed on the Provost website. The bottom line is we'd like your input through whatever channel we can get it, and we continue to receive emails that are useful as we do this work. One of the things that I've been looking at, and the team as well in the last weeks since we met, is governance, the structure of this office, and delegated authorities that support the academic operations and faculty advancement. You may or may not know that all the powers the university holds are delegated to us through Chapter 116 of the NC General Statutes. It's interesting to look at the language of that statute. It says that delegations must be, quote, prudent for the university to function in a proper and expeditious manner. So we've been making the case, both to ourselves and others, that good faculty-centered governance is prudent and that it allows us to function in a proper and expeditious manner. And one of the guiding principles that makes it expeditious, in my mind, is to have important decisions live as close to the faculty as possible. And in this, we share the Faculty Council's core goal of protecting the faculty's voice and shoring up our shared governance. So some of the progress we've made is clarifying some areas where the delegated authorities of the code may give weight almost exclusively to the faculty, and in places where the authority is shared. And two examples came up that I think are useful, and I'll throw them out for your consideration. We had the question of whether to extend the add drop deadline. This was taken up by our Educational Policy Committee, which is a committee of this legislative body, and it was discussed in the FEC. When it got to me, it was as a request for approval, and I sent back a comment that it doesn't really have to be a request, that the delegated authorities, actually the enumerated powers of this legislative body, would have almost entire power to set the add drop deadline. The only concern I would have would be if it was touching on our accreditation in some way, and Lynn Williford had assured me it does not. So I wrote back to them that this is really a decision that's coming to me and not so much a recommendation in this particular case. This is one where it's quite clear that the faculty own the weight of the authority. And I would just be ratifying that by checking that it had no other competing constraints. A very different one would be something like admissions. There is, of course, an authority given for admissions of students in the enumerated powers of the Faculty Council. That's in section, I think it's 2.8 of the code. But that one has to be balanced against some of the requirements on in-state and out-of-state. It has to be balanced against our ability to educate the students, financial concerns, our ability to house them. And so we've actually tried to write a delegation of this authority that mentions all of the things that are being balanced, because in fact admissions are delegated to the admissions office by the Faculty Council, and they are advised by a committee of the council. So these are the kinds of things I'm trying to document so we understand them, and we will share these documents. They'll be on a website eventually. Each one of them has to be discussed, and they may not be final even when we post them, because it's the idea here is that we at least understand who owns a decision, that the people who own it know when they're making the decision, and that any ratification of it respects any other shared governance that may be going on. This is not very interesting work. Sometimes it's detailed work, but it's important work. And so that's some of the things we're undertaking. As the matters come up, and in some cases, we're trying to anticipate things that will come up. I'm happy to answer more questions about that in a moment. But I do want to stop and talk about detailed work for just a moment. One of the things I am seeing, and it's in evidence in Terry's messages today, it's in evidence in some of the things that have come across my desk, is that we have to make intentional space for the kind of detailed work that goes into grant proposals, policymaking, accreditation, and that the failure to do that is causing stress in our systems. I think we're all in a hurry. We have lots more on our plates than we should. We've had a pandemic interrupting us. And I want to advocate, and really this comes from a statement that that our graduate dean, Suzanne Barbour, made in a meeting I had yesterday, that with all of the stresses of life, we forget that sometimes detailed work requires us to slow down and to make space for it. And maybe sometimes we're trying to do too much and we're missing some of the important details. And so I just wanted to throw out that we need to show each other grace sometimes, to not forget some of the steps. When a contract is not right, we need to get it right. When an authority is not well understood, we need to take the time to do that. And I think it will help to keep that in mind. Last things, I can update you on some of the other dean searches. We have received just this week a report back from the nursing dean search. We have a list of candidates to visit campus for the arts and sciences search. And I believe we have a short list coming in the School of Public Health search. Because we have so many searches, it's made a point clear, which is the faculty want to know where these things stand. They'd like to know who's on the search committees. And so we're working on a website for the Provost office that will maintain a running record of any searches, that will show who the contact is, who the search committee is, and be updated as to the status of searches. That's, I think, in a state of near completion. And I think it'll be a great thing for faculty to be able to go on and immediately get an update on searches, at least the parts that we can share for searches. So that's some work that we've been doing as well. That's the extent of my remarks. I just want to say again that it's a pleasure to be here in the office. There have been some challenges already, but they haven't gotten in the way of our main goal. We are putting together the structures that we need to work on faculty advancement. And we are learning those things, those stories, and some incredible stories that will allow us to be advocates for the faculty going forward. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll turn it back to Mimi to take questions.
Thank you, Chris. One just comment on something that you brought up, and that is the delegated authority and understanding the governance structures. Just as a recommendation, it might be, I would include our secretary of the faculty, Jill Moore, although it is not in code that she is the interpreter of the code, or if the person in that role is the interpreter of the code, it has been sort of the practice. And likewise, the Committee on University Governance is the kind of final arbiter, as I understand it, on interpreting the code. So that might just be another good connection.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's our intention to put all of these in front of the Faculty Executive Committee, who can then decide how to present them to the faculty, or just to put them on a website. A lot of these are just internal things where, for instance, the travel authorizations are being handled by Debbie Clark, unless there's one that's a special case and then it comes to my desk. So some of this is more procedural, but I think it is important for us to have a common understanding of how some of this works. So I'll take you up on that, and I'll make sure these get shared, both with Jill and the committee.
All right, thank you. It looks like our first question is from Deb.
Chancellor Gaskovich and Provost Clemens, we really wanted to commend you on navigating us throughout the pandemic, and looks like we are getting to the end of the pandemic. Fingers crossed. I do want to mention that we are in a space now. It's almost like a new refreshing chapter for our university. And as we prepare for that new chapter, I would really like both of you to please consider the salary equity on our campus. In about 40 minutes, the status of the Women Committee and our colleague Misha Baker, she will share with you some insights where she will highlight things about gender and salary. But I do want to highlight that there are inequities that not only exist on gender and salary in terms of gender, there are inequities in terms of race, in terms of rank. And this is a public university where everybody can find out what they earn or what others earn. And I think it saps motivation when or when you come to realize that somebody doing the same work is getting paid higher or lower. So I would request you both, as we move on. Now, this is a bad time to even talk about it because we are going through budget cuts, but if you could please consider the salary equity overall, not only for gender, but beyond, because it has been, as you would recall, 8 years since we even seriously looked into this. The provost mentioned about detailed thinking and detailed work. This is one thing that deserves some detailed study. Thank you.
Deb, thank you. I could not agree more. And I want you to know that we're committed to this. I had a meeting this morning. Nate Knuffman, our Vice Chancellor for Finance Operations, and I had a meeting this morning with a few faculty. Misha Becker was there, and we talked about this. And I'm proud of the fact that we have been able to balance our budget, as I mentioned at the last meeting. We were able to do that about 6 months earlier than we had anticipated. As a result, we are developing our all funds budgeting model. And as part of that, we have been in discussions with deans about how we can begin to address some of these inequities. And that will be one of the ways in which we will reinvest in our people through now with an ability to do this, now that we're not working from a deficit each year. And that's been made clear to our deans and others. So we will be continuing to work on this. And I think I have a follow-up meeting with Misha and her committee to delve deeper into this. And the provost will be by my side as we work through this.
Thank you. I do want to mention that a lot of our colleagues have shared instances where a dean or a director, fully aware that these salaries are public, have even initiated these inequities. And I think there should be a standard operating practice by which these things should not happen in the first place. So I really appreciate you thinking about this and promising to us that you would look into it. In some cases, the deans and directors have really not followed proper procedure, as we found out.
Okay, thank you.
And may I just add that Deb, my position here is I want to listen to the faculty on this. I know we have many data science experts on campus who've helped with the studies, and I think the data exist for us to continue to do a lot of this work ourselves and in collaboration with others. So I've read Misha's report and some of the older reports. I'm impressed with the amount of thought that's gone into it, and I'm really going to let Misha and her committee inform what we decide to do. I think retentions have to be discussed in this space. It's a very deep subject, how retentions can actually create inequities. But not to have anything. Retentions are great, right? They get people where they need to be, but sometimes we might need policies to think about equity in the retention process as well. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Do we have further questions for the Chancellor and the Provost before we move on with our agenda? Okay, seeing none, then we'll turn it over to Ron Strauss, who is going to provide us kind of the latest on COVID thinking.
Great, thank you, Mimi, and thank you, Faculty Council, for visiting the COVID-19 circumstances at the moment. I actually feel like this is a historic day. As the Chancellor has pointed out, it was 2 years ago that we really had to take a deep breath and submerge ourselves into the life of an epidemic in a way that we had not done in over 100 years. And it is a moment where we have some positive news to share. I don't quite want to go to where Deb went just a moment before, where he forecast the end of a pandemic. I think while there are still people in the hospital and in the ICU with COVID-19, mostly unvaccinated, but nevertheless there, it's important not to feel like we can wash our hands of this and move along. I do want to share with you, though, some of the numbers, because I think you'll understand a little bit about our circumstances. So since the 1st of January, I'm going to just talk about students right now because we have good numbers on students. 3,167 students at Carolina tested positive for COVID-19. There was a real problem going on, and it was the Omicron growth of the pandemic. But it turned out that though they tested positive, hardly any of them required any form of advanced treatment because the clinical manifestations were rather mild. What became of those positivities? Well, I just want to share how it's dropped off. 2 weeks ago, we had 39 positive students. Last week, we had 41, and this week, we had 18. So we've seen a remarkable decline in positivity. At the same time, what has happened is an enormous increase in the availability of home testing, independently tested people. So our testing facilities were mostly being used to confirm what people knew already about their status. They would test at home, and then they would come in and say, I'm just checking to see where we were. But as the numbers dropped over the last few months, the use of our testing facility dropped. And so we're actually ready to make some changes. And I'm just going to go over those very quickly with you. The first thing is clearly we dropped the mask mandate as of Monday of this week. That was a result of conversations and agreements with the Orange County Board of Health and the Orange County Commissioners, supported by the UNC system with consultation from the chancellor and a number of our infectious diseases specialists. And essentially, I don't need to review all the aspects, but our classrooms, not our health clinics, not our clinical care facilities, but our classrooms became mask optional. Our buses are not mask optional. Public transit remains a masked endeavor. However, this was a week in which we weren't really sure how our faculty and our students would respond to this major change in guidance. And I walked into my own class on Tuesday, 155 students, and I wondered, what was I going to see in a lecture hall? And I was actually quite impressed to see that at least 2/3 of the students were sitting there masked. And as we filed out at the end of class, I stopped and asked them. And what they said to me was, we've lived like this for 2 years now, and it's going to take us a little while to just start feeling safe again. And I think that not only students, but faculty have the same sense. This is a moment of perhaps feeling some malaise, feeling some joy at being able to unmask, but also feeling some concern about it. And so what I've been hearing from faculty and students is the genuine and sincere desire to make this voluntary and to let people who are deciding to wear a mask feel like that is just fine and to respect that decision. However, we cannot require masking in our classrooms. That's the bottom line. Very few classes on this campus, it turns out, did misunderstand that guidance, and that's since been corrected. And the grace of the faculty when I engaged them was really notable. So I want to say this has been an experience of excellent faculty support and truly student engagement. And at every level, I feel like we've moved along together. We've got some big lifts. We're going to be changing as of today our testing capacity. We're bringing in a private vendor. Honestly, the number of asymptomatic tests has dropped very, very dramatically. And the number of students who are seeking our tests have dropped. When you have a testing capacity and it's not being utilized, you know it's really time to change that. So the testing has been reduced in the number of days available for testing, the number of hours. And of course, if people are symptomatic, especially students, our campus health facilities will test them through other mechanisms. The other things we're thinking about are our dashboard. Our dashboard was based upon data we collected at a time where almost the only way to get tested was to come in and get a PCR test from our campus testing. That's not reality any longer. And so our numbers have no longer achieved a level of veracity. And so we've got to do something to alter that. We're working on that. We're going to give it some time. We're not going to rush it, but we're going to figure that out. You've already seen signage drop off in some of the buildings. Mask availability continues in a few places. Our community standards have been revamped. We're still promoting vaccination and boostering. You still can get a test on campus. And I still meet with our infectious diseases specialists at least once a week to follow any emerging variants and to ask if there are any new threats on the horizon. In particular, we're watching the BA.2 variant, that's a subvariant of Omicron, just to track its virulence and its effect on the population. We know that about 3% of the tests done in this county are revealed that BA.2 is in our presence, but that's a very small number and it hasn't been growing. And there is actually at this moment no evidence that people are getting more sick with BA.2 than they had with the Omicron variant. So we're watching and we're going to continue to watch. The other thing that we're watching, and I have to say, I feel much more optimistic about, I'm watching an array of possible treatment venues and treatments come forward. And just a few weeks ago, you couldn't get those treatments. They weren't available, but they are now available. And our physicians and infectious diseases specialists have an armamentarium to try and respond if somebody is having major symptoms of COVID-19, or indeed if they're experiencing the long COVID circumstances. Some of those are IV infusions, intravenous infusions. One of them is an intravenous push. That means it's basically an intravenous injection over 30 seconds. But the most promising one is called Paxlovid, and that's an oral medication that can be taken for people who are at health risk. Most of our young students are not at that health risk, but I'm talking to our faculty today, and some of you, should you become exposed or infected, may need care. And I want you to know that UNC Healthcare has a very well-tooled capacity at this point to provide you not just with one path forward, but with choices on which path you would like to take forward, and with good results. The good results are keeping people out of the hospital. The good results are keeping those that get into the hospital out of the intensive care unit because they don't need that level of care. Most importantly, I think it is a moment for us to demonstrate our compassion and our mutual caring as a community. For those of us that are having a hard time adapting to the new guidance, understand that it's going to take them a little while to get there. For students that are worried about classrooms, to educate them about the value of masking. Just this week, I had a rather remarkable discussion with two of our students, a husband and wife with a newborn baby at home. One of them is a law student, the other one is a medical student, and a newborn baby at home. And they were writing to talk about how do they protect themselves when they go home to their baby? And I wrote them back and shared with them that masking, good fitted masks, actually protect the individual from receiving infection as well as preventing them should they get infected from spreading infection. It is both ways. Both of them really didn't understand that. And in additional engagement with some other students and faculty, I've learned that the concept of masking, bilateral protection, is not always understood. We've got actually a wonderful consultant right on this campus, Dr. David Weber, who has published on this and is really well respected. And I literally got Dr. Weber to talk to these two students to help reassure them that they could safely be around people who might inadvertently have infection and not even realize it. But if they were masked, they would be protecting themselves and in turn their child. I got a wonderful letter back from the two parents, basically saying how that information helped arm them with understanding and how positive they're feeling about going forward. It was really an experience that our students are intelligent and are used to working with science and respect scientific findings. And sometimes what we need to do is just make those findings available to them. So for any of you that have questions about COVID or have concerns, worries personally, please let me hear. I'm responding to each of those as they come in. And for the most part, I think we've been able to provide people with what they needed in terms of information. So I'll stop there. There's so much more I could share, but I think those are the essentials.
Thanks, Ron. It looks like we have a couple questions coming in. Erica, I see your hand up.
Hello, this may be to all of our leadership, but we are starting to talk about what our students' summer plans and wondering what changes might be on the horizon for travel restrictions internationally in particular.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's really a changing scene right now. As you know, many nations are changing their requirements at the moment. For the moment, we're continuing to do the same kind of travel screening, but as I watch other nations open up and this country changing in its behaviors, I'm going to predict that it's going to be easier to travel, especially internationally this summer. And we're just going to work on that. I want to remind you how recent all of this is. Just a month ago, our students were distributing over 10,000 N95 masks because they thought that that's what they needed to do in order to protect themselves. Today, most of those students are putting those masks in their dresser drawer, and if they're using any masks, they're using the regular disposable masks. So I think that many lessons have been learned, and about travel, I predict that there will be travel much more frequently this summer. I know for myself, I'm taking my first trip abroad, and I'm just hoping that it won't be a problem. So we'll see.
Ron, can I add to
yes,
that
please.
for Erica? So Erica, just so you know, I have been approving with Debbie Clark's help almost every request for international travel. The only cases where and especially we've been approving our own study abroad programs where it makes sense to do that. So if you are planning travel, you should put forward the request, unless there's not in some cases where there's not a compelling reason, or it's an undergraduate, or there's something special. A handful have been declined, but in general, everything is getting through unless there's some special circumstance. So it's effectively almost all travel being allowed.
Were there other questions? Well, I just want to leave the door open. Some of you will have questions, or you have questions you just want to address personally. Please send them my way. I'm meeting regularly with the infectious diseases team. We're going to keep doing that until this becomes a memory, and then we'll go and celebrate. But until that celebration, we'll still consider this a time of pandemic. Thank you for being so caring to one another and to our students.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, it really is a big transition, isn't it, for all of us in different ways. And let's see, next, we want to welcome Dr. Leah Cox. We enjoyed meeting Leah a few months ago, but at that time she was getting her office up and running, kind of deciding what the initiatives were going to be out of that office. And so she is ready to sort of give us an overview and an update and talk with us about things she wants us to know and maybe ask us about. So Dr. Cox.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. And I'm going to share my screen with you. Just give me a second. Let's see. Oops. There we go. All right, is everyone able to see that? Hopefully, yes. Okay, so thank you. I arrived at UNC at the end of July and began my kind of current journey, meeting with members of the UNC community, understanding the needs and requests of the campus around DEI, creating a structure and a team to meet the needs of the campus, and imagining the programs and initiatives that will meet the needs and requests of the campus. And so let me just share a little bit about where we are, where we're going, and then open up for questions. So let's see if we can make this happen. All right, so as you can see, when I arrived, I probably had all of 4 team members and not enough to address all the needs of the campus. And then a university down the street from us stole a bunch of folks from my office. And so then I was really down to the skeleton crew. But as of today, we are building a robust team. We have just one more vacancy to fill, and we're hoping to fill that in the next week or two for our assistant director for student access and success engagement. So I added a senior director just about a month ago now, Miss Patricia Harris, who's doing a fantastic job getting the student success and access programs are ready to begin, and also making some really exciting changes that I'll talk about in just a minute. We also have added 2 new members to our Community of Education and Belonging team. One, Miss Ari Weinberg, and the other, Miss Brandy Simmons, who are going to be working with us. As you may know, across this institution, there's been a request for training and education and engagement. And so at the time, I only had one person who was running quickly, but not quick enough to keep up with all the requests. So now we're going to have 3 more folks who can help with that initiative. And then we've added some others who have round out our team, which has been great. So we're moving ahead, and this is what our chart is looking like. So let me talk about Project Uplift. I think most of you know that it is a signature program that has existed at UNC since 1969, and that's huge. And it is an access program for students from underrepresented backgrounds. It's immersive, it's on-campus experience that connects our rising high school seniors from across the country with a college experience here at Carolina. And so we have, the program has seen over 40,000 students, and that's phenomenal. And we're excited to once again begin this initiative and bring students to campus, which hasn't been done now in about 2 years. And I've started getting emails and calls about folks who want their students to come to Project Uplift. Unfortunately, we don't always have enough spaces for all the students, but we're doing our best to make sure that we can get in as many students onto our campus for a phenomenal experience for 2 days. We also have Project Uplift Plus. And so we're going to start making some moves and making some changes to these programs. So one, Project Uplift, it's Rising High School Seniors. Project Uplift Plus brings these students to campus for about 5 weeks. So they live on campus, they get to know UNC, they get to interact with folks on campus. We engage in in-depth testing for strategies around the ACT or SAT. So we know that institutions now, once again, are going to be accepting test scores from ACT and SAT, and we want to have these students ready. The good part about Uplift Plus is they get to live on campus and experience the Carolina way. And we see that over probably 90% of the students who engage in Uplift Plus end up at UNC. And so what I'm hoping to do in the upcoming year is to increase, because at this point we can only bring in about 35 students, right? And if with a 90% success rate, that's still not enough. So that we can increase the number of students that we bring in for Uplift Plus so that we can see some real changes here at UNC. So we're working, my team is working. I will be working with the Provost and the Chancellor to talk about how do we get more students here for Uplift Plus. We've also now started what we're calling our intergroup dialogue, relations and dialogue work. And this is a model that was started at University of Michigan. And it's about blending theories of experiential learning to facilitate learning about social group identity, social inequality, and intergroup relations. What we're looking to do is to train individuals across the campus to facilitate these kinds of difficult dialogues, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's at student meetings, whether it's in departments or school meetings, that we need to have some trained individuals who can help facilitate difficult conversations about race, religion, identity, sexual orientation, gender identity. And all of these things need to take place. And we know that they're happening, but sometimes not very well on our campus. And so we started our first introduction to this February 10th and 11th. We had trainers come from the University of Michigan and train about 20 individuals from across the campus about intergroup dialogue. We will then begin our training of other individuals on our campus starting in the fall, right? So we will be training trainers and facilitators. And so we're looking forward to getting this initiative started. We have at least 4 individuals from across the campus who will attend the National Intergroup Dialogue Institute this summer. Unfortunately, Michigan only receives 4 individuals from each campus. So we've selected 4 folks and they will bring back all the knowledge that they can. We are also going to engage in a campus climate study, starting with students this spring. So in working with Dr. Strauss's office and Hillel International and also my office and other campus partners, we recognize that UNC has not done a campus climate study since 2016. And that's a long time. And we need to know some of the issues that are facing our students first, so that we can begin looking at programming and how to assist in making them feel more engaged and included and a sense of belonging on this campus. So we're working with our research office, with Dr. Strauss's office, with a variety of partners across the campus so that we can get this out. And then we're going to engage in doing the same thing in the fall for our faculty, our staff, and administrators. We push the faculty and staff administrators until the fall because we recognize that a lot of folks are still figuring out where they sit on the campus. Are they hybrid? Are they remote work? Are they on campus? And we want them to have a sense of where they are, what they're feeling, and then ask them about their understanding of the climate. We're asking for input from all of our campus partners. We're meeting with them to give us advice. The vendor that we're looking at is going to allow us to add some questions that we think are relevant to our campus. And so we're working with that, and hopefully we will share the results of the students in the fall when we return. And then lastly, there's the DEI Council that started before I came, but we have continued forward with members from every school across the institution and from various units. And so we've divided into subcommittees, as you'll see on the screen: policy and equity review, data metrics, faculty data metrics, education and community engagement, and then organizational development and leadership accountability. We're asking from each of these subcommittees a report that will go to the provost and the chancellor for further discussion, and then to move forward with some of the recommendations. So I can say that the committee members, all of 32 or more, are doing a lot of work. I've received my first report already that I'll share with the provost and the counselor and the chancellor in the upcoming weeks. And then talk about how we share some of the information we receive with the campus at large. So those are just some of the things that we're doing. We're making a lot of moves. It's taken a lot of work, but I'm still excited to be here and to continue moving forward. So Mimi, I'll turn it back to you to answer any questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it has been a real pleasure to get to know you, Dr. Cox, and to spend time with you. We spend time together on a monthly basis, just talking about how we can collaborate and things I'm hearing, things she's hearing in order to do that. So really grateful for that. And I know you've also been doing some work with student groups on campus and attending to some of their requests, their lists and things that have been put forward, suggestions, ideas. Could you tell us about some of that work?
Sure. So when I arrived, as probably many of you know, our Black student movement group had made demands, I call them requests, of our campus. And we've been working to move some of those things forward, and we're doing a great job. One of the things that I recommended is that we be transparent about where we are, so that it's not just me constantly responding to emails from everyone, but we created a website so that you can get a sense of where we are on each of the demands. It's a progress report that exists on the UODI website. You can do the drop downs and see where we are. They're either completed in the works, or we could not get them done, or we can't do them. And so I encourage all of you to visit the website, look at the progress report, and then if you have questions after that, I'm happy to answer them. Or if you have suggestions and ideas, please bring them.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments for Dr. Cox?
I mean, if I could just add to your last question, as recently as yesterday, Leah and I had the opportunity to sit with members of our Arab Student Association, which is a relatively new student group. And I couldn't have been happy with how that meeting went, and especially because Leah was there by my side, along with Christy Hurt and Amy Johnson. And, I think we need to do a better job of listening more frequently to the students, the lived experiences of our students from underrepresented communities, and some of the unique challenges that they have. I learned a lot in that meeting. We have several follow-ups that we're going to work on to try to make sure that we're addressing and tending to some of the unseen needs of those students. And so, Leah, thank you for being there by my side for that. And you're doing an incredible job in this role during some challenging times. So I just want to echo a lot of what Mimi said, and thank you for all you've done in less than a year. We're coming up, I guess we're coming up on about 9 months. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And we'll please reach out if you'd like to come back, and we will invite you back as well from time to time. So thank you.
I will be back. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Professor Misha Becker heads the Committee on the Status of Women. And as Deb referenced earlier, and you all received her report, she has led a very detailed effort looking at salary equity by gender on the campus. This is an issue that has been ongoing. And so Misha has some ideas about how this body might act in the future. However, we wanted to at first take today to sort of brief you on the whole report. And then it may be that we come back to you next month with some requests for action after some additional meetings have taken place. So, Misha?
Thank you, Mimi. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah, so thank you, Mimi, for making some time in today's agenda for me to talk to everyone about the amazing work that my committee has been involved in. And I want to really thank all of the members of the Committee on the Status of Women for their hard work, and also several other people who have contributed to this effort. Lynn Williford is one of them I'd like to highlight, but there are many other people as well who have been focused on this and working hard on it over the years. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of historical perspective. Over the years, I guess close to 20 years now, there have been a number of salary studies conducted at UNC. Many of them have been conducted by the Office of Institutional Research and Assessment, OIRA. And in addition, the Committee on the Status of Women conducted its own study in 2019 using a slightly different methodology than the OIRA studies. But basically, the take home from these studies is that even when you control for tenure status and rank, on average, male faculty earn more than female faculty, and on average, white faculty earn more than faculty who are African American, Latinx, American Indian, or identify as another racial category. And just to be totally transparent, the COSO study in 2019 did not look at race and ethnicity, it only looked at gender, but the OIRA studies have looked at both. I want to say something specific about the School of Medicine. So the School of Medicine is actually not included in the OIRA studies that I'll talk about today. So I'll mention studies, I'll mention data from health affairs, but it will be health affairs without medicine. But I know from talking to a number of faculty in the School of Medicine that there is quite a lot of variability across departments in the School of Medicine in terms of the details and requisites of departmental compensation plans, in clinical and productivity-based incentives, and in the distribution of administrative supplements. The School of Medicine has done some of its own studies, and they published some initial findings in 2018. I don't actually have access to that data. But at any rate, this is just to say that due to some of the additional metrics that they use and differences in the salary structure in the School of Medicine, the most recent salary studies by OIRA have not included their data. Okay, but what we can see when we look across time at these studies is that salary equity really remains a problem at UNC. So for example, as of 2020, mean salaries for men and white or Asian faculty exceed salaries for women, Black, Latinx, or American Indian faculty by around $30,000 per year. There's also really huge disparities in the permanent distinguished professors. So the number of distinguished professors who are women, Black, Latinx, or American Indian is really dwarfed by the number who are men or who are white. And we can see some of these numbers if we look at these tables. These are taken from the 2020 OIRA study. So if we look at the mean and median salaries for male and female faculty in academic affairs, we can see the large disparities there. Similar story in health affairs without medicine. And in terms of the racial disparities, they're also pretty troubling. So in academic affairs and also health affairs without medicine. And I mentioned the issue of distinguished professorships already. So if we look at academic affairs, 20% of male faculty hold a permanent distinguished professorship, but less than 8% of female faculty do. And the racial disparities here, again, are pretty troubling. So about 18% of white faculty versus about 5% of Black faculty, faculty. And we see similar patterns in health affairs. And I just want to underscore that apparently there are 0 Black faculty who are distinguished professors in health affairs without medicine, at least as of 2 years ago. I don't know if that's changed. So when we look at this historical perspective and we look across the roughly 20 years of these studies, we can see that there is actually progress in some areas, but we also see regression in other areas. So one of the positive trends we see is that the number and proportion of female faculty has actually increased in every rank from the period of 2001 to 2020. So for example, if we look at the proportion of assistant professors who were female in 2001 versus the proportion who are female in 2020, we see an increase. So that's great. On the other hand, we continue to see a negative trend in the representation of women at the higher ranks. So those numbers and proportions continue to decline. So if we look over time, if we look at the number of assistant professors who were female in 2001 and the number of or proportion of full professors in that same year, we see a decline, but we see that same decline 19 years later. So that is discouraging. We see similar trends in other ranks or other tracks of faculty. So these are tenure track faculty in health affairs. When we look at fixed term faculty, it's in academic affairs, it looks a little bit different. There's a much larger proportion of female faculty overall. I also want to point out that fixed term faculty are also paid a lot less than tenure track faculty. I'll come back to compensation in a moment. But for fixed term faculty in health affairs, we still see this really troubling decline in female representation at the highest ranks. So while representation has improved for women faculty, compensation remains highly problematic. Most alarmingly, the gap between the median base salaries for men and women at the rank of full professor in academic affairs has actually widened. So in 2001, the gap was about $8,500 per year, and in 2020, it has risen to almost $27,000 per year. The gap in median base salaries has also widened at the assistant professor level in academic affairs. So in 2001, the gap was a little over $3,000. In 2020, it was almost $5,500. And that's problematic, well, for a number of reasons, but one, because we know that the salary that you're hired at will have repercussions for all of your later increases. And so if you start at a lower level, you're gonna see lesser increases later on, potentially. There's a steady gap in the median base salary at the associate level. It's around $2,000, but it continues to favor male professors. And these are just for academic affairs. I have graphs for fixed term faculty and for health affairs, if you would like to see them at the end. So the OIRA studies, when I say academic affairs, that actually combines data from several different units. So it includes the College of Arts and Sciences, the schools of business, education, government, information and library science, law, journalism and media, and social work. And so, you might think, well, maybe it's just one or two of those units that is really problematic, but everyone else is doing okay. But in the 2019 study that COSO conducted, they actually looked in each unit separately, and they found that the male-female salary disparities exist in pretty much, almost every unit in the university. So it is really a widespread problem. So, so that's sort of the picture as it is today. And so we want to talk about how to move forward. And our committee has joined up with the Fixed Term Faculty Committee and the Faculty Welfare Committee. And together we would like to propose some solutions to the situation. And we want to focus on three priorities: attention, analysis, and accountability. So attention means holding sustained attention on this issue, having a sustained strategy and implementation. And this needs to come from the highest levels of our campus leadership, from the chancellor, the provost, and from deans, and also a sustained attention from below. So from associate deans and senior associate deans, from department chairs, as well as individual faculty. Although I want to say in the same breath that I don't believe it is the burden of individual faculty to solve this problem, but I think it's important for everyone to keep attention on this matter. In terms of analysis, we've seen that there have been various analyses over the years, but they've been spaced pretty far apart. And so we want to propose that there should be annual salary studies with annual reporting of equity measures, and biannually a tracking of the trends that we're seeing over time. And then the third part is accountability. We think there should be internal accountability, so within units, and also external accountability in the form of some sort of public-facing reporting of our progress. And I'll flesh those out in just a moment. So I think there are a number of steps that the administration could take that would be really helpful in seeing success in these initiatives. So one is the formation of a salary equity oversight committee. Several other campuses have this kind of a committee. I know Duke has one. And this committee would be charged with reviewing the annual salary equity analysis, which hopefully would cover both faculty and staff, investigating university-wide and within unit policies and practices, some of which might maintain or even exacerbate salary inequities. And then also reporting on progress towards our institutional goals. We also think there really needs to be a long-term commitment as well as short-term goals. We want to propose that the university commit to maintaining focus on this for at least 20 years. Why 20 years? Well, the earliest studies that I told you about today come from about 20 years ago. And in each of those studies, concrete proposals were made and suggestions were made for how the problems can be rectified, but there hasn't been a long-term focus that really followed up on those proposals. And so we need to have that longevity to really see this through. We also want to insist that the focus be sustained even after gaps are minimized or even closed. You know, if we had $1 billion, I bet that we could rectify all of these inequities overnight. But as soon as we have more hiring, as soon as we have retentions, as soon as we have another raise distribution, all of that progress could be undone. And so we need to prevent that recidivism. I also want to underscore the need for establishing short-term goals for improvement. So when I say we should do this for 20 years, I don't mean that we should wait for 20 years to see progress. So for example, currently, if we look across all ranks, women faculty at UNC earn about 79% of what men earn. That's from data from the Chronicle of Higher Ed. So an example of a short-term goal could be, to bring that to 90% in the next 5 years, and then to 100% in 10 years, and then to sustain that going forward. Another thing that I think the administration could be really helpful with is making a concerted effort to award distinguished professorships to women and faculty of color. So I showed you already some numbers about the distinguished professorships. When we look in academic affairs, 77% of them are men, 88% of them are white, and we see a similar disparity in health affairs. 76% are men, 73% are white. And I also want to say that I think the administration and the university campus as a whole should really take a broad perspective on how inequity in faculty and staff compensation stems from systemic practices in hiring, in mentoring, in time to promotion, in retention, and also how it impacts well-being and campus climate for all employees. So I think something like salary inequity has a multitude of causes and a multitude of consequences, and I think it's important to really take all of that into perspective. And then finally, of course, we're talking about money, and I think money will be needed to fix the problems that we're talking about. And I think that some of that that probably could be justified or maybe made a bit more feasible by making this really an explicit part of the strategic plan. So the things that we've been talking about are already central to several of the components in Carolina Next. So build our community together, enable career development, serve to benefit society. Each of these components of the strategic plan has particular objectives, specific objectives that actually directly address the kinds of things that we're talking about. But we don't see wording about salary equity. So I think that might be helpful. In terms of the analysis, so the studies that OIRA has conducted are really, really excellent. They're really well done. And they use a methodology that is very standard among institutions of higher ed. And I think it's very helpful, but I also think it needs to be supplemented with alternative statistical methods. So the regression analyses that are used in the studies we've done so far have some shortcomings. And one of them is that they control for variables like tenure status, rank, whether you have a distinguished professorship, that are themselves gendered. And when you control for variables that are themselves gendered, then you risk masking underlying problems. So why is it that women are less likely to have tenure or to have a fixed term appointment, less likely than men to be a full professor or to have a permanent distinguished professorship? And there are other issues having to do with small sample sizes that make it difficult to interpret some of the results. And so the point here is not to say that those kinds of studies shouldn't be done. They just need to be supplemented with additional methodologies that are also accepted. And so toward that end, we want to suggest that there should be collaboration between OIRA, the Odum Institute, and also individual faculty that have expertise in statistical methodology, of which there are many on this campus. And we've spoken with Lynn from OIRA and with the director of the Odum Institute, and they're very eager to collaborate on this. So I think that is an important piece of this. Another thing is that there are models at other institutions that can be looked to and built upon. So for example, UC Berkeley implemented an initiative to deal with salary inequity in 2015. And in 5 years, they really saw impressive results using their methods. And so I think we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel completely. I think we can build on these other models. And then the final point that I want to make about analysis is that I think it's really important to supplement these quantitative analyses and data with qualitative data about why faculty leave when they leave and how salary and raises are determined. So the accountability part, I mentioned earlier that we need to have both internal and external accountability. So on the internal side, raises and salaries are generally determined locally. So they're determined by individual department chairs or maybe associate deans or senior associate deans. And in some ways, those are the people who are in the best position to know like what would be an appropriate salary, an appropriate raise in their discipline or given their faculty's efforts. But obviously there are problems somewhere. And so there has to be some kind of accountability mechanism. So deans should be looking at historical patterns within departments to identify problems and then enable solutions. So if there's a department where it's evident that over time inequity is not improving, or maybe it's even getting worse, then maybe there needs to be a justification of raise distributions or a justification of salaries. Our committee has actually developed some tools that could be helpful in all of these things. So in the fall, we developed some salary audit tools for both race and gender. They're quite easy to use. You do not have to know anything about statistics. It's pretty basic math. And we distributed those audit tools to all deans in the university and all department chairs in the college in the fall. And we also developed some guidelines for best practices for equitable raise allocations. Was also distributed in the fall. And then in terms of external accountability, we hope that the university could develop a website that spells out what we are doing. This will help with transparency. And also some kind of a data visualization tool, like a dashboard that can help us track how we are doing in our efforts. And I think the more publicly available information we can have, then the more we can hold ourselves accountable to outside. And also, I think this is an opportunity for us to really show off really great things that we could be doing. So in that vein, I want to propose that we can be leaders here. So actually, if we look at other institutions of higher ed, our peers, we don't look too different from them in terms of salary equity. But rather than looking at that and saying, well, like that's just the way it is, I think this really presents us with a great opportunity for us to be leaders in higher ed in this arena. It would improve faculty morale. It would create some good press, which I think we could use. And at the end of the day, it's just the right thing to do. So I want to thank you all for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take questions. And I do have some further graphs and information if anyone would like.
Misha, this is just incredible work. I knew it was incredible work, but just to see it presented like this, I'm even just more impressed with the level of detail that your committee has gone into, that you have, the thoroughness with which you have examined this situation, the statistical critique that you've done of past analyses, which in my view is right on target, as well as being forward thinking and providing solutions and looking for new models. So just bravo and thank you. Do we have questions for Misha or comments?
I'll go first. Misha, thank you. I want to echo what Mimi said here. I think there's a lot to be done here. I like the way in which you're forward looking in terms of what can we do about it and putting some action steps in place. Is there a way, have you broken the data out and looked at it by discipline? So within academic affairs, are there greater disparities or inequities, I guess is the right term here, in certain disciplines versus other in terms of gender inequities?
That is an excellent question. I have not seen that data because when I have inquired about it, the issue that I come up against is that the protected status data, I don't have access to that. So I can look up individual people's salary in the public database, but I don't have the time to look that up for each individual person in the whole college. And then when I ask for that data, to be given to me, I'm told I can't have that data. So I think someone needs to look at it, but it hasn't been, as far as I know, it hasn't been done. I would love for it to be done.
Okay, and you're asking, and who is saying that it's not available?
So to be honest, I asked within the college. Since I'm in the college, I didn't ask for it outside of that unit. But the dean's office in the college said that was difficult to tease that apart.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Okay.
I have some more questions, but Mimi, maybe you want, I know there's some questions that coming in the chat. I want to be sure that others' questions are answered.
Thanks. I'll just bring this in from Allison, and I think I know the answer, but I'm not sure. She asked about what happened when you presented this information to deans. Were there any patterns in response? But I don't know that you have presented this to deans. I think this is the first public presentation of this data.
It's the first, right. It's the first public presentation of all of it together. I mean, I think, COSO made a presentation at last year's, one of the spring faculty councils, but I don't think we presented quite this big of a picture. I think it was maybe more, I don't remember now what we presented, to be honest, but it wasn't quite this comprehensive. I have not presented it to individual deans. I did present it to, as I said to Kevin, to the dean's office in the college, but I believe Terry Rhodes was not actually at that meeting. So it was the senior associate deans that I was presenting it to.
I'm so sorry, and I will unmute and forgive me if there's background noise. When I was looking through your amazing report that was admitted before today, it said there was a recommendation list of how to create equitable raise processes. And so that said it had been sent to deans and chairs, I think. And so I was just wondering about that one. I'm sorry for the confusion.
But that is true. Yeah, I apologize. So I did email all of the deans in the university and all of the department chairs in the college in, I think it was early December. So, right, I sent them the document that we wrote that was, the best practices guidelines. I didn't hear back from everyone. I did hear positive responses from several deans saying, thank you for sharing this with us, basically. But I didn't follow up with anyone to see whether they actually used them. At the point that I distributed them, we actually did not know that we were going to be getting raises. And then at the time that we found out we were getting raises, there was such a quick turnaround. I didn't actually have, and I'm a department chair, so I was also working on allocating raises within my department. I didn't have time to follow up with all of the deans then at that point.
Thank you so much. Definitely not trying to give you more work.
There's a question about why the School of Medicine was excluded from the analysis.
Yeah, that's a great question. Is Kenya, are you on the meeting? I wonder if you can unmute and help with that.
I don't see Kenya. I'm doing a quick scan, but it sounds like the pay structure is quite different there, so that it would just be its own kind of separate analysis that really needs to be done. Is that a general?
I might be able to help a little bit with that.
Oh, Ron, thank you.
Yeah, the School of Medicine lives with a compensation plan, at least for its clinical faculty. And that means that compensation might vary across the academic year. And so it was not easy to get fulsome data, and it would take quite a bit of work. The medical school did do its own salary equity assessment. And I feel like that should be reviewed and should be available to your committee. But it's not it doesn't fit into the equations in the same way that the rest of the university does because of the different compensation practices.
Yeah, I did know about the 28. I don't have that data. I could probably get it, but I don't have it currently.
Thank you, Dr. Strauss. This is Kate Bernard. I raised the question, and I'm in the School of Medicine, but I guess I would encourage you. It may have a different methodology, but it has the same issues. So I'd encourage you to include that in your advocacy.
Absolutely, and I do want to underscore that our committee strongly feels that the School of Medicine needs to be included in studies going forward. We need to find a way to make that possible. When I spoke with Lynn Williford, who is the person who's really done basically all of these studies, and she's an amazing person, has done so much work on this. What she told me was that there were changes in recent years in the structure of the compensation in the School of Medicine that made it very difficult for her to fit their data into her models. And so I think it probably can be done. I'm sure it can be done. She just wasn't able to do it with the resources that she had. So I would love to, I think that is super important. We need to focus on that.
Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in the chat, and I see Betsy has her hand up as well. Let's see if we can speak to some of these quickly. So Allison has put a resource in the chat that I'll just ask Misha to take a look at. Mark was asking about, it looks like what he's asking about is control variables. And as I understand what you said, Misha, that's a very tricky thing to incorporate. And I know this from my own work, that if you are incorporating control variables, you are incorporating gender implicitly. So, if someone is more likely to be a distinguished chair, if they're male, then by controlling for distinguished chair status, you are masking a problem with gender. So sometimes the raw data is more helpful. Is that a fair statement, Misha?
Yes, it is. And so none of these studies looked specifically at discipline, except that the COSO study had sort of I think that study, and that was conducted before I was actually a member of the committee, so I wasn't personally involved in that one, but it did have sort of a way of looking at a proxy for discipline, but the methodology used in that study was a little bit different from the regression analyses that OIRA has done. But yes, it is a problem to sort of control for variables that are themselves gendered. Yeah.
Okay, and Rumey is asking about banding rules playing into all of this. And then
so Rumey, do you mean specifically regarding staff salaries?
Yeah, and even ranges where yeah, just looking at in general how that plays out. So gender wise.
Yeah, I don't have data on staff salaries, and I would love to include staff in anything that gets done, because staff salary inequity I just know from talking to people on campus, it is a huge problem. But I don't have that data. I'm not aware of how banding applies to faculty, unless you mean rank.
I did mean rank. I did mean rank.
I mean, I'm not sure how to answer.
That's okay. It was just a question that came to my mind because I do know that sometimes salaries, who gets hired and negotiated a higher salary, sometimes, well, we can't negotiate for that, even though that may be what the market is and we're below that. We can't negotiate for that because they would throw all the other salaries off. So the justification is if I don't go with that higher salary, then I don't have to do that for other people. So in order to keep it where it is, I don't offer it.
Right.
So it's an invisible band in a way.
Yes. Okay.
In terms of the thinking. That's, yeah. So
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, definitely. I think that's the kind of thing that would actually be really, it would be revealing to look at qualitative data for that. I don't know how to obtain that, across the university. But I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at.
Betsy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Misha, and to all of your committee for the work that you've been doing over several years now. And also, I'm in gratitude for you thanking all the others who have been working hard on this for many years at the university. And of course, part of our task always when we're looking at equity is understanding the data, ensuring that the correct data is collected, ensuring that it can be analyzed, and also that there is, I suppose, a will and a vision for collecting that data and analyzing it in a way that expresses the ideals of higher education, and particularly UNC. And I'm wondering what kinds of expressions of vision you've heard while you've been having conversations. So as you know, one of my concerns, as soon as we begin talking about data, we end up parsing out our conversation. Our goal becomes focused on this idea of how do we collect the best data? How do we analyze it? All of this is, of course, very important. And then we never move on to this question of why equity? Why is this so important? What kinds of values motivate our leadership? I see that Provost Clemens has his hand up, so perhaps this is what he is coming in with. I'd love to hear that, or from Kevin. But I'm just curious. We can continue working on this issue. So many of us have in so many different ways on our campus, and I would love to hear at this point a strong vision from our leadership about why equity matters. And what the goal might be for trying to achieve it. Thanks.
Thanks, Betsy. So Provost Clemens, I think it's up to you.
Well, I think I had a technical question, so I was really guilty of doing the thing that you said we do when we see data. So let me bump out of that for a minute. I think there is, when we talk about the correlations or the idea that we would correct this for rank, field, et cetera, and see what happens. Another way to look at that is those are giving us the qualitative measures of how some of the disparities occur. Not all of them, but some of them, right? And so it actually is information. And one of those was just in the report. There are far more men in distinguished professor ranks than women. And so the advice to make a concerted effort to nominate women for distinguished professors is in a way both a corrective to the issue of disparity in rank and a corrective, if you do it well, to the issue of salary. So I think, without continuing too far down that technical line, I think the way we look at the data should inform solutions in the end, and the solutions should express the same values that Misha was highlighting in her report, right? We do not wish, as a matter of equity, to have pay disparities. But if we pull on that rope, and at the end of it, what we have is a disparity in our willingness to promote or nominate for leadership positions, based on gender, then those are the things we need to address alongside the simple numbers. So, you know, if you just had money and you dropped it on people who were in a disparity, what you would miss is that that you have disparities in your willingness to consider folks for leadership positions and other things. So I think you know, I'm not advocating for a kind of blindness around this that only looks at pay. We need to look at our structures for how we do recognition, promotion, nominations. This really does fall on our faculty advancement task. And so I think we've already seen some of these reports in the transition committee. But I think it would be interesting, Misha, to have you, and I know you talked about coming over, we wanted to wait for this meeting. It would be interesting to have you meet with our transition committee so we can be thinking about how in the process of doing advancement around awards, we also think about advancement around promotions. And the one that I really want to touch again is retentions. And I can't remember, when I was chair, we worried a lot about what was called at that time, and maybe this still exists as a thing, a loyalty penalty. There was you know, you are penalized for not making waves in the sense of getting an outside offer and getting retained. But there are many people here whose salary raises have been highly dependent on, I don't want to call it a strategy of retentions, but there are people who are more or less willing. And how is it seen when someone comes with an outside offer? If there's a gender disparity in the way we view that, then there will be an incentive for some and not others to use moments like that to raise their salary. I think those things have to be, as the qualitative part has to be as much of the conversation as the quantitative. So I really appreciated Misha drawing that point out, and would love to have you come to our transition team, because I think it's clear what our values should express here, but getting from here to there does require that we look at practice around many pieces of the institution and not just the ARP process, for instance. So I hope that's a long answer, but and maybe it didn't have enough vision in it, but if it didn't,
You're on the spot. It's okay. All right. I think we probably need to make a transition in our agenda now, but again, just many thanks to Misha, I think, and her committee, and all the people you've coordinated with Lynn Williford and others in the Odom Institute's willingness to provide expertise going forward. So I think this is really a good moment to take up this charge and move this work forward. So thank you, Misha. And I want to ask Tim Ives. This is I think our agenda says an update from the Faculty Assembly, but this is actually an update from the UNC system. Tim Ives is the chair of the Faculty Assembly. So in some ways it's an update from the Assembly, but he is also very close to the system action in his role. And so it's different than if we had the chair of our Assembly delegation. So I just want to make that distinction. So Tim, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mimi. Good afternoon, everybody. Just one little thing to start. My office was kind of noisy, so I moved to a place you know very well. This is Carr Hall, where the Faculty Council used to meet. I'm kind of hoping we get back to face-to-face meetings fairly soon, but we'll talk about that later. Yeah, I'm here to give an update, but also a little background. The UNC, this assembly is part of the UNC system. And we are made up of delegations from all 17 campuses, the 15 universities, and the 2 schools, School of the Arts and School of Math and Science. Our mission was written 50 years ago by President Friday, fall of 1972. So we're coming up on our 50th anniversary. But we serve in an advisory capacity to the system president, to the system office, to the board of governors, to the General Assembly even, and locally for you, to campus administrations. There's a staff assembly as well, and Katie Musgrove with the employee forum is involved there. The approach we've taken over the last couple of years is moving from being reactive to talk about things that have already occurred and moved into a more proactive stance. I call it being at the table. And so some of the things that Mimi sort of alluded to, is what we're doing. We're following the mission statement, but we're also becoming far more evidence-based, and Misha's presentation fits that perfectly. We've talked about salary inequities across the entire system. So I may have to come ask you for that, Misha. But we're also then at the table in committee structures and committees within the system office, within the Board of Governors even. Now, by state law, we can't be on them because it would be a conflict of interest. But we have been getting involved at the committee level. A couple of examples. Budget and finance, we're talking about a new funding model, and I'll mention that in a minute or two. But Jim Holmes, the chair, asked, are any faculty really knowledgeable about the budget and finance that would like to serve in an ex officio advisory capacity? I had 3 names within an hour of people in management, finance, business who would be involved. The Committee on Audit, Risk Management, and Compliance is dealing with a lot of issues. We had over a dozen faculty within an hour who are working on things like cybersecurity, and they're now ex officio members. Thanks to Elaine Westbrook, we've been involved with the University Library Advisory Council. You just heard Leah Cox talking earlier about the DEI Council at the system office, and we're hopeful we'll be able to develop a liaison relationship with them as well. And the Veterans Affairs, we have veteran faculty across the entire system who are now getting involved with the Public Affairs and the Veterans Affairs committees. And there's a lot of veterans who are coming back who are going to be entering the university system, and they're a rather growing group, and we're going to be there with them to talk about the issues. I'm on the Educational Planning Policy and Program Committee. We're talking about things now about whether standardized admission tests should be considered or should they become an option. We're looking at a lot of different things. University Personnel Committee, the CAO meetings. I see Provost Clemens and Provost Strauss at meetings about once a month at least. So you get the sense that we've got a lot of different things where we're now at the table, where in the past, it really wasn't the case. So I thought I'd give you my list of things that we've been talking about, say, in the last year. And you can get all of our minutes by going to the UNC system website and go to the faculty assembly page, and you'll see everything there if you really need any. A local one that actually we started about a year or two ago with Chapel Hill was the term constituent representative. So Chancellor or Provost Clemens, when you talked about shared governance, we have campuses across the system where the Senate chair, or in our case, the council chair, may get a brief conversation, an annual report to the Board of Trustees, whereas others, they're expected to be at every meeting and be there in that capacity. Lloyd Kramer was working on that, and I'm hoping that's one that we can continue to grow across the system. Over 500 faculty got involved with the common numbering system. Many of them are from the Chapel Hill campus, where aligning courses across the entire system so that people coming from community colleges can really see what really will fit into their degree requirements, seeing what other campuses have that may fit your degree program. I saw Mark McAnally on the screen a while ago. He and Jen Larson, I think Tim Ryan gave a presentation to University Governance Committee. We're now talking with them about free speech and really some of the barriers to that. And we're also looking at collegiality agreements and collegiality statements where they're fully aware that there's been such a divide for years, and it's time to start bringing some of these things back for a frank discussion. We're also making sure that, and you've heard it on this campus, but also at the system office, that faculty and by extension staff and student leaders are involved with all search committees. There's nothing to hide, and we've asked that that continue. And that, again, fits the area of shared governance and just common sense along the way. Most of you should have gotten all of the emails, I think, in the last week or so about a town hall related to the refresh of the UNC System Strategic Plan. Samantha Carney is one of the associate vice presidents for strategy and planning at the system office. She's met with the executive committee. She's met with the faculty senate chairs that Mimi's on, and met with the entire assembly over the last 2 weeks to get input. And now they're going to every campus. They're talking to all the different stakeholders across North Carolina. So I encourage you, if you have the opportunity, or even if you're unable to make it, send a note to Samantha, or we can get it to them. One that people have heard about, and probably have heard about too long, is the funding model. It's over 20 years old at the UNC, from the UNC system. As a point of reference, Erskine Bowles, when he was system president, thought it was grossly outdated, and he was the system president 20 years ago. And so this is something they're working on. There's a lot of concern about certain aspects of it, and we're working with the system office and with the Board of Governors, and they're going to be presenting the model as they have to the provost, but they'll be presenting it to the faculty in our April meeting. We've got some concerns about the equity of graduate programs across the UNC system, not just one particular campus. Campus safety is also an issue, safety and security. During Black History Month, there were, as you probably saw, a number of campuses that had death threats, bombing threats. We're now working with Fred Sellers, one of the newest members of the system office. He's the vice president for safety and emergency operations, came from the US Secret Service. And we want to start developing programs, similarly to what was done with mental health, to work on campus safety and how to deal with emergencies, and to really help staff, students, and faculty develop some better senses of what to do. In the summer 2020, we endured the murder of George Floyd. Within a day or two after we got back together in the summer, that was in June, we put together a request for what became the Racial Equity Task Force. To their credit, Board of Governors Chair Randy Ramsey and then Interim President Bill Roper formed the task force in 24 hours. We're still working out a lot of the recommendations that came out of it. We're not pleased with everything we've seen so far, but it's a work in progress. My last ones are the things like discontinuance of the UNC online system. This may not be a big issue for Chapel Hill, but if you're at an HBCU or you're at a rural campus, this is a major issue. And so we are advocating that they really take a look at that, because it disproportionately impacts those campuses. And so, again, you get the sense that we deal with things on a 17 campus level. Project Kitty Hawk is off and running. One of the things that we requested even before it did take off is where are the faculty going to be involved with it? They received $97 million to develop the system. This will be the challenger to Purdue Global or Arizona State or Southern New Hampshire University, all of those platforms, but it's just starting. I've sent a dozen names of faculty across the system and still looking for more to serve on the academic advisory group, where it'll be very similar to the faculty assembly, but at the Project Kitty Hawk level. The last one is something that I will probably turn back to this group, but one thing that we did get involved by pressuring or trying to influence was Board of Trustees training. We had this at the November meeting of the Board of Governors, and I got all of 30 minutes to talk about the tenure and promotion process. If Ron Strauss is on, you can laugh at me with that. but it was at least a good start. But with a lot of the activities and responsibilities moving back to the campuses, this is something that they really are looking forward to. I had put out a slide or several slides, PowerPoint on just the life of a member of the faculty and the tenure and promotion process. And I had more Board of Trustees members coming up afterwards saying, this is good stuff. I never knew half of this. And I thought, oh my goodness, we've got a lot of work to do. So I think this is where the activities will really continue to develop. And we're hopeful that we'll have that. I also did want to give my last point. I realize the time is late, but a thanks to Chancellor Gustavus. The fact that we are going to be meeting on April 22nd over at the Rizzo Center, back to face-to-face meetings or a hybrid. And I wanted to, one, publicly acknowledge him because he said, we'll sponsor it with you. And so Chapel Hill is going to take the lead with that. And I just, it's one of those where I think you've heard some of these along the year with Jan Hannick, but be happy to take any questions at this late hour of the day.
Tim, thank you so much for that update. I think people often wonder about kind of all the different ways that you're involved and all the different connections that happen. So it's good to hear about that. I think at least once a year directly from you and what your experience has been. So thanks so much. And I am going to move us along because I know Jill has some important business she wants us to get to today. And I will give the gavel over to Jill at this time.
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks everyone for being here on the Friday before spring break. I'll ask you to hang in with us for just a couple of really important votes. We've got some honorary degrees that we want to vote on at the very end, and I hope you'll stay with us for that. Before we go into closed session to discuss the honorary degrees, we did have 5 committee reports this month, including the Status of Women report that Misha presented earlier. Those reports were provided in advance for you to look at, and all but Misha's report are scheduled to be accepted by title, which means the chairs are not making a formal presentation, but they're present if you have questions. So that's Advisory Committee, Buildings and Grounds, Committee on University Copyright, and Faculty Welfare Committee. Are there any questions for any of the committee chairs whose reports were submitted for this meeting? Allison?
Yes, thank you. So this is for the Building and Grounds Committee, and Chancellor Guskowitz, you might be able to add context too, but I'm not sure. Last year, a group of students and I coordinated a proposal for a permanent memorial to James Cates Jr. on UNC's campus to recognize his murder at the hands of white supremacists. I'm wondering if there's any update on that memorial.
We are currently working with the town of Chapel Hill. The mayor, I've discussed this with the mayor. I have brought this recommendation before the Board of Trustees. They had some additional questions. So the mayor and her team, we just discussed this in a meeting about maybe 3 weeks ago. So I will be bringing this up again at a future Board of Trustee meeting as they have final approval over any naming of a building or a landmark on our campus. So more to come on that.
Thank you. Just to follow up, I'm familiar with the process, and I know that the naming committee and the Building and Grounds Committee do have impact on it. And so I guess I'm just curious. I know there was conversation about renaming the student stores and this memorial. Where are we sitting in the university formally and financially spending some money to recognize this horrific moment in our history?
Allison, as I've said, there's a recommendation that's been brought before me. I've taken to the trustees. There are some questions that have been asked as to how the town would partner with us on this. And so we are, it'll be going back before the trustees for consideration.
I guess I'm confused because in our proposal, there was no request for the town to be involved necessarily. So I think that's why I'm a little confused.
So I think what I hear the chancellor saying is that this is pretty complicated, that there's a lot to negotiate between multiple different bodies, and that it isn't simply a matter of only recommendations by committees. So I think we're going to have to put this on the agenda to come back to it.
that's perfectly fine. And I'm sorry to have been a thorn in your side. It's just been a while since I've heard an update. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to propose that we accept all the committee reports that we've received today, the 4 that are submitted by title, plus the status of women report by unanimous consent, which does not require a motion or a vote. If we proceed by that route, then all the council members who are present will be recorded as having voted in favor of accepting the reports. If there's an objection, then we will have a vote. Is there any objection to accepting these reports by unanimous consent? Okay, hearing none, the reports are accepted. Now at this point, our next report is from the Committee on Honorary Degrees and Special Awards. And to consider this report, we need to vote to go into a closed session to prevent the premature disclosure of the names of the proposed recipients. Only faculty council members may stay in the closed session. We'll have to return to open session to adjourn, but for our guests' information, there's no further business planned for open session today. So is there a motion to go into closed session at this time?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Renee and Joy. The vote will be by poll. Helena, could you please open the poll? Voting yes means you vote to go into closed session. Okay, it looks like we have a unanimous vote to go into closed session. So Helena, would you please close the session and confirm with us when we're closed?
Helena, will you let us know when we are back in open session?
Yes, I don't know if it's going to work in YouTube. It's taking up. There we go. We're back.
Okay, we're back in open session. So at this point, the only thing that stands between us and spring break is a motion to adjourn. Yes.
So moved.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a motion. We have somebody who would be willing to be a second. And
Second.
By unanimous consent, we can adjourn unless there is objection. All right, thank you, everyone. See you in April. Have some time off.
Thanks, everyone. Happy spring break.
Everyone.
So it sounds like we have a motion. We have somebody who would be